want to ask you, we're talking about it can take up to 8 years to get diagnosed. And I think, you know, just under the umbrella of both endometriosis and PCOS, you know, I think one of the studies that I did also that usually it only gets diagnosed at a point where people are seeking help for infertility or for not falling pregnant.
Yes. And oftentimes, as you're saying, you know, the pain, I can deal with the pain. I'll just have painful. But now when I want to have a baby, that's often the time where people will go to the doctor and say, hey, something's wrong with me. Not realizing the signs were actually there for a long time before you actually were having challenges with conception. But yes, when it comes to endometriosis and PCOS, fertility is often the point at which we start digging a little bit further. Again, you know, when it comes to diagnosing endometriosis, it's not an easy condition to diagnose. It's really based on the symptoms. So as we've said, those pain syndromes and that kind of thing. But also it's based on quite an invasive test. It's typically not, you know, that invasive, but it does require you to go to theatre. It's called a laparoscopy, where they put cameras inside the abdomen to visualize and see those patches that I was talking about of abnormal tissue outside of the uterus. That's how endometriosis is diagnosed. Now, can everybody afford to get into an operating room to get a diagnosis of endometriosis? Often no. And if you look at the public healthcare system, you're definitely not going to get into theatre for a laparoscopy to diagnose your endometriosis. It's not going to happen because there's a waiting list of people who require gynecological surgeries that are considered a lot more important, life-saving, than diagnosing endometriosis.
And it's just in period pain.
That's it.
Yeah.
So just, you know, pop the anti-inflammatories and take birth control and get on with life. And so there are many challenges around this issue of how and why are we having these delays in diagnosis. And even when the diagnosis is received, oftentimes people feel overwhelmed with, okay, now what do I do? Right? What are my options?
Yeah.
And oftentimes you'll find that people with endometriosis end up going back into theatre several times because one of the ways that we treat endometriosis is by getting rid of those patches of that tissue. And oftentimes it's burned or removed. Yes. And unfortunately, we know that once you get into the abdomen, you get scar tissue. And we said that part of the reason why people with endometriosis have pain is because they bleed and have scar tissue in the first place. So every time you have another surgery, it's basically the cycle of inflammation and scar tissue that keeps going on and on and on. And the treatment oftentimes can perpetuate the disease. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation, which is why addressing some of the underlying things and the lifestyle things potentially that we could do to help to relieve some of the symptoms becomes so important. Because oftentimes people with this condition are at a loss because they feel like, I don't want to go back into theatre. What are my options?